We've heard the perspectives of neighbors of color 2 weeks ago. We've heard perspectives of youth and students last week. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit about why Winnetka is as white as it is and why the North Shore is the way that it came to be. And leading that discussion, we have two esteemed hosts. That's Gail Schechter, who leads Heroes, who for 22 years led Open Communities, who's been an activist and an advocate in this space for longer than I've been around. And Dino Robin, who founded the Shorefront Legacy Center in 1995 and has been working for decades now, Dino, on the Black legacy on the North Shore. So, we're in great hands. Really couldn't have any better hosts, and I can't wait for their presentation. So Gail, Dino, I'll pass it over to you, and thank you.
Thank you so much. Patrick mentioned I'm also a historian as well as having run the Descendant of the North Shore Summer Project, which you'll hear about a little later. So I'm very proud that I come at this work as a community organizer, but also as a trained historian. And before, as a preamble to this, and you can see from this very slide, you see this question mark, what about Chicago's North Shore, put over a picture of Montgomery, Alabama and Selma. And there's a direct connection here between a recognition by Winnetkins and people on the North Shore that if you're going to fight racism in one place, if you're going to fight for voting rights in one place, then we should look in our own backyard and see what are the issues here. And on the North Shore, it's housing. And we're going to mostly get into that. I want to start by quoting from the Dr. King Monument on Winnetka's Green. Dr. King said, "History has presented us with a cosmic challenge." So we are at a crossroads here. In the last two sessions, we heard about experiences of racism in Winnetka every day. Today, we talk about the systems that created and support that whiteness. But it's important to recognize that there's a symbiotic relationship. It's a back and forth between systems and culture. Our talk today is about, in fact, our choice. Winnetkins have a very complex history. It's not just a history of exclusion, it's also a history of progressivism. So I don't know how many of you knew that there's actually a statue of a homeless man in Winnetka, and it's and around that statue are quotes from Henry Demarest Lloyd. And I took a picture of, that's a picture I took, and on the statue it says, "No tenements for some and castles for others." That is right in the community. So when you talk about reclaiming a tradition, think of Lincoln at Gettysburg. And if you're going to read a book, a book that's high on your list should be George Wills's book, Gary Wills, I'm sorry, Lincoln at Gettysburg, because he talks about how he reclaimed the Declaration of Independence and all men are created equal as our founding document, which was not recognized at the time of Lincoln. It was the Constitution. He showed the cognitive dissonance with the Constitution and led the path toward ending slavery and amending that Constitution. And Martin Luther King did the same thing. He talked about the promissory note. He invoked that progressive tradition, and that led to further changes. So it's pulling on that history. So today we have started a new movement, and we can also engage in a refounding, in essence, of Winnetka and the North Shore. So Dino and I are going to go through some of that history, mostly from the last 60 years. Again, this is, you may not be aware that there was actually a march from Kenilworth to Evanston to tell the Board of Realtors that, in fact, the people of the North Shore wanted integrated housing and not discrimination. I wanted to mention quickly, this is going to be the ultra quick. Richard Rothstein wouldn't have spoken this quickly. But in the South, as I mentioned, you had actual Jim Crow laws and obstacles to voting. Here it was housing discrimination. So when you hear, excuse me, that that people say that if you want to promote integration, you're socially engineering. Well, the suburbs and our cities were created by social engineering, especially after World War II when GIs came back and a lot of money, we were very wealthy, and money was used to allow people to settle in the suburbs and highways to be created. But the federal government itself created barriers to lending to African Americans and promoted home ownership for whites. They had support from the financial services industry and the real estate sectors. Skin color became as much a determinant of housing value as location, location, location. And indeed, in predominantly Black communities and predominantly white ones, you see very different access to the objective things that matter when you're talking about location, like quality schools, transit, jobs, green space, and green air, or clean air. I'm showing you here some pushback from the Board of Realtors in the 60s when there was an effort to pass the Fair Housing Act, which eventually did pass after Dr. King died. So I think of when you talk about systems or systemic racism, think about it as the power to exclude and ask yourself, does a policy pass this smell test? So we have in Illinois home rule powers that seem to coincidentally coincide with the passage of the Fair Housing Act. That is the ability for local communities to pass its own laws. Are communities using their home rule powers to include or exclude? With school funding based on the property tax, who is excluded and who is included? If you have zoning laws in your community that have maybe just 1 unit per acre, I'm being very extreme on that, who is then excluded and who is included? And if we do transit planning and we don't want a bus line in our community, for example, back in the 60s, Northbrook didn't want a bus line on Dundee Road. You had people objecting to the Skokie Swift going all the way up to Northbrook Court. If you prevent a bus line or a train line from coming in, who is excluded? That is what systemic racism is really all about.
So thank you everyone for participating this evening. We do want to make this clear and concise as possible, so I'm going to try and be as brief as possible. And then hopefully maybe near the end we'll start pointing you to other resources that are available for further research and study if you'd like to know more information. But with this, the summer project, the idea behind that was to entice Black families living in the city of Chicago or elsewhere to move into the North Shore suburban communities outside of Evanston. Evanston wasn't part of that suburban community. To entice families to live in Winnetka, Wilmette, Kenilworth, Glencoe, and other Highland Park and other areas that normally did not attract enough of a Black population in those communities. And there was a lot of mixed information with that, a lot of mixed reaction with that within the Black community. Those who wish to move, but then understanding that maybe there's not enough resources, community resources, or comfort level that they may want to be involved in, or that will help entice them make that final purchase. Some families did. We did have, I think at one time, John Johnson living in the North Shore for a while. He was the publisher of Ebony Magazine, Jet Magazine. I think you have more like notorious people like Mr. T, but you know, came way after, but that's a whole other story right there. I also had, you know, families, you know, everyday families like David James, who came to these areas, but not necessarily through the summer project, but that type of messaging got that information around and highlighted the North Shore area in that. And as these communities, this project was moving forward, and I think, Gail, you can move to the next slide. And as families were coming in and, you know, being encouraged by real estate agents to really invest and look into homes along the North Shore, you had a lot of families that were engaged as well to try and facilitate that and filling out surveys and reviews that, yes, I would love to have, you know, an African-American neighbor, or I have no problem selling my home to an African-American family. Be that as it may, sometimes, you know, the optics of showing support is great, but when it comes into actual implementation, may not be great. I did try reaching out to one family that I knew that lived in Winnetka for a while, just off of Sheridan Road. They live in the south suburbs now, but I have not been able to contact them and connect with them. But it was a family that I knew of during the 70s. I kind of grew up a little bit with their kids. They've all scattered throughout the United States. But I do remember at one point talking to them when I was, you know, hanging out at their house, what is it like to live here? And they expressed several levels of comfort and discomfort living in the community, citing isolation or lack of connection within the community. And other nuances that are not necessarily visible, where families would put on a strong face to live within that community, but all of them eventually moved out and had no intention of moving back to the area.
So, of course, I could say a lot more than I probably have time for. But first of all, most of the people in my group were pretty savvy, so nothing in the presentation really surprised them. But they were struck by, it just reminded everyone that there's been consistent efforts and consistent opposition. And so that was just a reminder that, you know, this isn't going to be as easy as it looks, and that it's been a problem for a long time. We did talk a lot about what our responsibility is to bring about a culture of welcoming. And one of the suggestions was that we form coalitions across categories of groups that have suffered discrimination in the past, and help them know that about their own group's history. And then people are also suffering from discrimination now. So in other words, it isn't just about African-American discrimination, but it's about all different kinds. Of course, Jewish people are very welcome in Winnetka now, for the most part, although I guess there's been trouble in some communities with swastikas on synagogues, but it isn't quite the same as it used to be in terms of quotas and everything. So partly this was a point about reminding everyone that other groups have faced discrimination. There was a really good point made about making Winnetka itself more welcoming to the people who already live in it, that it's not a very friendly place as you walk down the street. People don't see each other, they don't have block parties anymore, they don't sit out on their porches and talk, which I thought was interesting because, of course, anyone who moves into Winnetka, if they don't feel welcome, whatever their background or ethnic group, that they'll leave again too. Now, there are different ways that people network, but it was an interesting comment. There was a reminder of the vitriol that this issue arouses in people. And the point was made that it's better to do education before you have a specific affordable housing proposal on the table, because then a small group can, take over the conversation and kind of wreck it.
The most enlightening thing was Isaac, and Isaac is new tonight, and he's just like in the first presentation when the two gentlemen said that they didn't feel welcome in the North Shore, like in Wilmette or Winnetka, that they felt isolated and alone. Isaac is feeling the same way, and fortunately, two women who belong to RAIN have invited him to join their group so that they can help him. But this is really the issue that we're seeing is that when people do move here, they're made to feel like they're, you know, if they're not white, then they're somebody's servant, or you know, and not somebody to be treated nice. And his daughter is suffering from that too. And this shouldn't be allowed. So we really need to work on the community, just like that first lady said, more of a welcoming community to make people of color and different ethnic groups feel welcome in the community.
Share one of my thoughts in chatting with Dino over the last couple of weeks has just been, you know, I knew nothing about the story of the heritage of Black families on the North Shore, which I find really inspiring and interesting and powerful. And I hope something that, you know, can inspire our communities to remember that, you know, we had this, and this is something that, to Gail's point, we can rise to the occasion and hopefully welcome again.